Today we discover a story where a quiet life is shattered by an extraordinary secret. Samuel Washington, a humble hospital worker, loses his beloved wife Lorraine, only to find she's left behind not just memories, but a hidden fortune meant to change the world. Shock turns to courage as Samuel faces elite families, social prejudice, and the pressures surrounding his son's high-stakes wedding. In a breathtaking moment, dignity triumphs over wealth, reshaping relationships and forging an unforgettable legacy. Lorraine's fortune becomes a force for good, sparking a foundation that lifts children and unites communities. Grief gives way to hope as ordinary routines transform into lifelong impact, and one small family's love ripples through an entire city. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Imagine crossing the threshold into your past, heart pounding with anticipation, believing happiness awaits, only to be thrown into the heart of chaos. This is the story of Kenneth, a man forged by hardship and battlefields, returning home after years of service in the army. His arrival was meant to be a celebration, a secret, joyful reunion with the twin sister who had always been his anchor, the living half of his soul. He envisioned tender embraces, laughter echoing through familiar halls, the comforting aroma of traditional meals simmering on the stove. For years, those sensory memories had been his lifeline, sustaining him through dust-choked nights and the relentless drill of military discipline. Finally, he was here, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, packed with intricate souvenirs and tales of far-off places. A small parting gift for the girl who once shared every piece of his childhood. But as he entered the old family compound, the air vibrated not with warmth, but with tension so sharp it almost sang. A chair lay overturned, its skeletal legs reaching skyward in a grotesque parody of defeat. Papers, once the foundation of dreams and learning, now littered the pristine marble floor like autumn leaves after a storm. There, in the center of this mess, was his sister, Chem, eyes wide with terror and disbelief, pinned to the ground beneath the mocking shadow of her university degree. Hovering above her was a figure whose presence twisted the very essence of the room. A husband, arm raised, fist curled, and a visage marred by a fury raw enough to shatter anything delicate and beautiful. In that timeless moment, Kenneth's anticipation, days spent rehearsing what he'd say and imagining the joy, faded into something far darker. The soldier who had mastered desert survival felt suddenly untrained for the violence raging in his own living room. Medals glinting on his chest were now nothing but impotent metal compared to the bruises coloring his sister's face. The emotional battlefield he landed in was unlike any he'd prepared for, one where love and loyalty dictated not duty, but survival. As chaos erupted, Kenneth was transported back in time, swept away on a current of memory. He recalled the small village where their journey began, a place tucked between promise and poverty, where sunlight streamed through cracked panes and laughter rang as music. He and Chem had been inseparable, threading flowers into her hair, carving dolls from scraps of wood with their father's revered pocketknife. Their home, though modest, overflowed with richness the world rarely measured. Each morning brought the symphony of their father's voice, deep and cheerful, booming out stories on the veranda, tales of adventure that flared their imaginations. Their mother's gentle humming provided the undertone, the sound of unconditional love and security, grinding pepper for the evening meal, planting jasmine along the windowsill. The rhythm of life was steady, the sunsets always promising another day knitted tightly with kindness. Yet fragility was the true nature of such perfection. Like the morning mist that gathers above the Lagos Lagoon and vanishes without warning, their happiness could not last forever. It began with a simple cough, dry and persistent, tearing through the quiet nights, disrupting godless sleep, unraveling the comfort each child clung to. The village healer was summoned, a wise old soul with comforting eyes but trembling hands, and after laying his palm over their father's chest, he could only offer words the twins failed to comprehend. "Consumption, too late. Prepare yourselves," he murmured, his voice a prophecy of looming pain. Herbal remedies saturated the house, sharp scents mingling with the smell of decay. Despite hope and effort, nothing could halt the advance of the disease, gnawing at their father's spirit. The physical transformation was stark. Hands that once lifted children to the boughs of mango trees turned translucent and frail. His voice dwindled to ghostly whispers on each strained breath. Their father's decline cast shadows that reached beyond immediate pain, stretching into days and tomorrows. Kenneth and Chem watched helplessly as strength faded from the man who'd been their fortress. His eyes, always quick to twinkle with laughter, now held a deep sorrow, seeing into a future emptied by his impending absence. Then, on a rain-soaked afternoon, the inevitable happened. The sky unleashed torrents, hammering the tin roof as if nature itself mourned. Their mother collapsed beside the lifeless body of her beloved, her wails splitting the hush with unspeakable grief. From that moment, she was no longer whole. She retreated into the silence of loss, unable to eat the gifts provided by neighbors. Immune to the laughter Kenneth worked so hard to coax out. Even the empty chair became an altar to a happiness lost. Days turned into a ritual of mourning. She spoke to her late husband's photograph each morning, set extra dishes for the spirits of the dead, and began wasting away, her existence flickering like a candle soon to be snuffed. The twins hovered near, powerless against this invisible thief. Grief, stealing not only their mother's presence, but her will to live. She spent hours unmoving, anchored to the veranda where stories once flourished, lost in dialogue with voices no one else could hear. Kenneth, desperate to reclaim her, attempted miracles, performing the magic tricks their father had perfected, gifting bouquets of wild flowers, cooking soups that ended in culinary disaster. But nothing penetrated the fog. One early rain-drenched Tuesday, Chem tried to wake their mother, but encountered the quiet finality of death. The village doctor declared that her heart had broken cleanly. Some wounds, he explained, are so deep that survival becomes impossible. Lessons bloom. The house, once bustling and vibrant, was emptied, left only with echoes, then the terrified breath of two orphaned children, who suddenly understood the vast, cold enormity of the world outside. 8 years old, alone, trembling in the face of a world suddenly cruel and indifferent, Kenneth clung to his sister with the desperate certainty of a shipwrecked soul. "We have each other, Chem. We'll always have each other," he promised, voice raw, chest heaving. In the shadows of loss, he vowed, unaware that such a promise would come to shape his every choice. Exacting demands he could scarcely imagine. What followed was a blur of funerals, the ritual parade of neighbors dressed in black, the low hum of gossip, relatives appearing from the recesses of family history, all to judge, redistribute, and claim. Adults discussed the fate of the orphan twins, their voices thick with duty and burden. Kenneth and Chem sat, too small for the benches assigned to them, watching possessions being bartered, as if they were worthless trinkets. Among the vultures emerged Uncle Taiwo, their father's younger brother, and his wife, Auntie Falake, a woman whose smile was as sharp as her words, appraising the remnants of the twins' former life with calculating eyes. Lessons bloom. Remember, this is how the fateful Batman begins. While she knelt beside them, her honeyed voice promised care and compassion, but Kenneth detected the grip of her fingers on Chem's arm and the thinly veiled resentment in the way she spoke. Plans were made without the twins in mind, as if they were mere shadows, obstacles in the way of a tidy inheritance. As soil fell onto the graves of their parents, echoing like rain, dampening dead leaves, Kenneth's chest filled not only with grief, but with a chilling understanding. Their childhood had ended with the first handful of earth. The adults, absent during times of prosperity, now circled in hopes of extracting every last resource, including the children who had unwittingly become collateral in a family transaction. That first night under Uncle Taiwo's roof was the inauguration of a new existence. The twins lay on thin mats in a suffocating storage room, surrounded by sacks of rice and discarded furniture, listening to the muffled arguments of their relatives. The grown-ups spoke of obligations and expenses, their voices tinged with resentment. The twins were no longer children to be cherished, but liabilities to be managed. Unwelcome intruders in someone else's life. Kenneth, wide awake and counting the cracks in the ceiling, understood with devastating clarity that they were not wanted. Chem's quiet sobs dwindled as exhaustion took over, sealing them both in helplessness. Tomorrow would bring not warmth or comfort, but endless reminders of their orphan status and the cruelties of adults who saw them as dead weight. Yet as the night wrapped around them, Kenneth held Chem close, whispering promises of protection, a binding spell against despair that might, someday, wreck him. Family, he learned, could be a prison, one built with false kindness rather than steel bars and guarded by the unspoken laws of power and inheritance. Their parents' house, once a sanctuary, was already spoken of as a property to be divided or sold, their lives bartered for profit. The boy who once knew only innocent play was soon faced with battles for survival, forced to fight, not for land or money, but for dignity and the right to exist. Their new home sat on the town's edge, painted a screaming yellow meant to hide the rot growing within. As they arrived with their handful of belongings, Auntie Folake greeted them with disdain, setting the tone. This was no haven. "You'll earn your keep," she barked. "No special treatment." Her own children watched gleefully from the doorway, sensing the unfolding spectacle. Labor replaced play. Kenneth and Chem woke before dawn, worked until nightfall, existing on scraps and hand-me-downs, while their cousins feasted. Hope diminished, replaced by resignation. Chem's spirit, once buoyant, faded, and Kenneth, learning the bitter edge of injustice, started plotting their future escape with the cunning of someone pushed too far. But resilience often thrives in the crucible of adversity. Even as the days stretched as gray and barren as the rainy season, Kenneth refused to let go of the promise he'd made to Chem, or to the memory of the parents who had once cocooned them in laughter and light. While most children flirted with mischief and dreams, Kenneth's daydreams were laced with strategies for survival. He learned to anticipate Auntie Falake's demands, preempting criticism with diligent chores. Chem, retaining a fragment of childhood innocence, found solace in hidden corners of the compound, fashioning flowers from yarn scraps or scribbling her name onto discarded schoolbooks. Despite the grinding routine, small sparks of hope occasionally glimmered in their drab existence. A kind neighbor, Mama Ejiro, sometimes slipped them oranges or a handful of roasted groundnuts. At dusk, an old school teacher would let Chem borrow second-hand storybooks, opening windows into lands where misery was conquered by magic or kindness. Under the moon, both twins whispered secrets and hopes, letting their imaginations sketch futures brighter than their present reality. Lessons bloom. Still, Kenneth's sense of duty tightened like a belt, cutting into every joy, but keeping the fabric of their lives from unraveling. When their cousins mocked Chem's stammer, Kenneth intervened with fierce loyalty, earning a split lip for his trouble, but never surrendering. Resilience, he discovered, wasn't just surviving hardship. It was staring down cruelty day after day and not letting it poison your innermost self. These were lessons he would carry with him forever, ingrained deeper than any classroom recitation. Yet even in those moments of stubborn resistance, there was the ever-present ache, the knowledge that their chances depended on forces they couldn't control, and that no act of courage could bring back the family they'd lost. One sweltering afternoon that shimmered on the edge of hope and despair, a letter arrived that would alter the very course of their lives. Uncle Taiwo, clad in his Sunday best despite the heat, summoned Kenneth and Chem into the parlor, a privilege rarely extended. Chem's heart hammered, uncertain whether this was deliverance or condemnation. An envelope, crisp and bearing the official seal of the federal government of Nigeria, lay on the table. The letter announced that Chem, against all odds, had qualified for a coveted scholarship, a full ride to attend the best secondary school in the state. Her performance in primary school exams dazzling enough to break through the constraints of poverty. For the first time since they had buried their parents, real hope seemed not just abstract, but tangible, pressing against their fingertips like silk. The elation was overwhelming. Chem cried openly, her laughter mingling with tears. Kenneth, arms wrapped tightly around her, unleashed a pride he had suppressed for so long. Their joy disturbed Uncle Taiwo, who barked that their fortune was no excuse to slacken household duties. But the significance wasn't lost. The opportunity represented a conduit out of obscurity, a foothold on the steep slope toward independence. Auntie Folake shrugged, muttering about the inconvenience, but even her bitterness couldn't dampen the twins' light that night. As Chem prepared for her new life, Kenneth's vow to protect her multiplied in meaning. Success wouldn't come from the benevolence of relatives, but from their relentless support for each other. Lessons bloom. Chem's future beckoned, a shimmering horizon beyond the reach of those who had once held them captive. Chem's departure was a moment woven from equal strands of anguish and anticipation. Early one morning, Kenneth escorted her to the bus station, her modest suitcase packed with more hope than belongings. The whistle of the departing bus marked not just her physical journey, but a kind of emotional dividing line. The first time the twins had ever been truly separated. Chem looked back through the frosted window, eyes brimming with tears. "Promise me you'll be all right, Ken," she pleaded, her words trembling with both faith and anxiety. Kenneth steadied her hands through the glass, fighting back the panic of letting go. "I promise," he replied, uncertain if he could ever fill the hollowness her absence would leave. Back at their uncle's house, life was lonelier and even more austere. The only thing that softened the ache was Chem's frequent letters, careful, slanting script brimming with the excitement of new friends, borrowed textbooks, and teachers who praised her sharpness. Every word reminded Kenneth of why their sacrifices had mattered. He too grew in those years, learning the rigors of manual labor, absorbing wisdom from elderly neighbors, saving every naira he could. He found odd jobs at the market, shouldering burdens that would strengthen his arms and his resolve. Through the grind, Kenneth built not just muscle, but a quiet, unshakable will, the kind of foundation that would later carry him through whatever wars lay ahead. Both twins became architects of their fate, laying bricks of perseverance and encasing the pain of their past in cement only they understood. Years passed in a blur of struggle and adaptation. Chem excelled academically, her awards outshining her tattered uniforms. Kenneth became indispensable to neighbors, his reliability becoming almost legendary in the district. Despite the distance, the twins never lost touch. They wrote and saved for rare visits. Each reunion a celebration that resurrected fragments of lost childhood. Eventually, Chem's achievements earned her a place at a prestigious university, a leap forward neither of them could have imagined during those bleak early years. As she left for the city, their bond did not weaken. If anything, it deepened, restrained neither by miles nor by social inequities. Kenneth stayed behind, working and saving, but his mind followed Chem through every lecture hall, every exam. During these years, Nigeria itself was in flux. Political instability, economic crises, and local unrest became the backdrop to their determination. Every setback in the country echoed in their lives, reminding them survival was never guaranteed. Yet against this tumult, Chem's academic triumphs and Kenneth's steadfastness became a testament to how despair could be subverted. As Chem edged closer to adulthood, opportunity arrived again in the most unexpected of ways. Kenneth received a coveted offer to join the military. Service promised escape from poverty, respect, and, crucially, the ability to support Chem through her remaining years of study. Though parting was agony, both recognized the necessity. With great emotion, they promised never to let distance or danger erode the covenant forged in childhood or the memory of those first sacred vows. Service in the military reshaped Kenneth's existence. Near daily drills under the unyielding sun forged his body into its own weapon. He traded the familiar rhythms of the village for the chaos of boot camp chants and the constant pulse of uncertainty. Letters from Chem became his most precious possession, folded and reread until the paper thinned. Reminders that somewhere beyond the line of the horizon, love and hope abided. As months bled into years, the world widened for Kenneth. He traveled across Nigeria, then beyond its borders, his eyes opened to the cruelty and complexity of conflict. War imprinted itself on his soul, burning away whatever softness had survived his childhood. Yet, paradoxically, the more danger he faced, the more determined he became to preserve a version of home, of Chem, of what remained of family, untouched by violence. Chem, meanwhile, continued her own battle in the city's lecture halls. She was often isolated, the only dark-skinned girl in rooms full of privilege, but her intelligence and empathy won respect. Despite her growing accomplishments, she never flaunted them, quietly funneling part of her scholarship stipend home, so her brother could afford provisions and books. They communicated in whatever way they could: letters, scratchy phone calls, rare visits filled with laughter and tears. Each conversation was a salve, a reaffirmation that neither hardship nor time would suffice to break the vow made over their parents' graves. In this manner, even as the world threatened to overwhelm them, Kenneth and Chem proved that the roots of family run deeper than absence, deeper even than despair. Time has a way of twisting memory, casting the painful parts in sharper relief, while softening the edges around fleeting joys. For Kenneth, each passing year under the military's unforgiving regime only deepened his longing for home and for Chem. Letters from her felt like lifelines, each word drawing him back to a promise he'd made years ago in the darkness of loss. But the reality of return was never exactly as he pictured it. When the day finally came, after official discharge papers, months of planning, and sleepless nights riding the tides of anticipation and anxiety, he anticipated a reunion marked by relief, laughter, and perhaps bittersweet acknowledgement of how far they'd come. Instead, he stepped into a war zone of a different kind. The house he once knew seemed both familiar and alien. The once cozy entryway now echoed with shouts and crashed objects, and the air smelled not of jasmine and simmering stew, but of fear and resentment. Chem's husband, Victor, was mid-tirade, every muscle coiled, anger radiating from him like a furnace. Chem cowered on the ground, her face bruised, her dignity in tatters, one trembling hand clutching her degree, as if it could shield her from the blows. Kenneth froze. The many battles he'd fought, against external enemies, desperate poverty, senseless violence, were nothing compared to the horror of seeing the strongest person he knew rendered voiceless and violated in her own home. He felt a wild surge of rage mixed with shame that he hadn't been here to prevent this. Gone was the shy girl with a ready smile and a hunger for books. In her place was a woman stripped of safety, her spirit battered by someone she should have been able to trust. Confronting Victor demanded all the discipline Kenneth had gained in the army. He wanted to strike, to unleash a decade's worth of righteous fury, but his training held him in check. He couldn't afford to become the thing he hated. Violence wouldn't heal Chem or erase her pain. Instead, Kenneth's words became his weapons, each one steady and cold as steel, his tone betraying only the barest tremor of emotion. Victor sneered, unmoved. To him, Kenneth was nothing but an interloper, an old soldier trying to wear the mantle of hero at the expense of another man's pride. "You don't know what goes on here." "This is not your business," Victor spat, his voice oozing entitlement. But Kenneth wouldn't be cowed. He was more than a brother. He was Chem's last protector, the living embodiment of those promises hammered into his soul over years of hardship. The confrontation stretched on, voices rising and falling, neighbors gathering outside, whispering and speculating. In a moment thick with tension, Chem finally found her voice, shaking but resolute. "Kenneth is my brother. He always will be." What happens to me is his business, because I am his family, in ways you've never understood. The declaration fractured something in Victor's resolve. He stormed out, muttering threats. Kenneth gathered Chem in his arms, holding her as she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. The scene was raw, almost primal, a return to the vulnerability of two children orphaned by fate, and now, years later, battered yet unbroken by the world's cruelties. The aftermath was a storm of emotions and uncertainties. Chem and Kenneth, alone now, sat amid the debris, papers scattered, furniture toppled, shadows lengthening as dusk settled in. They did not speak for a long time. Words felt too small to contain their pain. Eventually, Chem began to speak, her voice fragile, but gaining strength with every remembered detail. She confessed the depth of her isolation, how dreams of a better life had suffocated under the pressure of respectability and the desire to please a husband who had only grown colder and more violent with the years. She spoke of the shame that often choked her words, the fear that he could destroy not just her body, but her hope. Chem's success, hard-won and born from sacrifice, had become a source of bitterness for Victor, not pride. His insecurities had festered, transmuting affection into control. Listening, Kenneth wrestled with his own guilt. Had he failed as a brother? Should he have done more, written more, pressed closer? The hard truth was, both twins had survived by sacrificing parts of themselves, and sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough to stave off tragedy. What mattered now was being present, together, and building healing from the ruins. They spent the next days in deep conversation, revisiting old memories, reading Chem's favorite books, cooking together the stews that reminded them of their long-gone mother. Each small ritual became resistance against despair. Each shared meal a statement that they would not be defined by suffering. Slowly, flickers of resilience returned to Chem's eyes, and Kenneth, though scarred by his own experiences, remembered a time when joy was easier to find. With the immediate threat of Victor gone, Chem and Kenneth began the work of charting a future free of fear. There were legal hurdles, filing official complaints, securing protection, and navigating a justice system with a long history of failing women. But Chem approached each step with new determination, propped up by her brother's unwavering support. When the wider family caught wind of the events, reactions were mixed. Some urged Chem to return to her husband, shrouding their advice in the language of tradition and obligation. For the sake of family, forgive. For the sake of status, endure. The pressure was relentless, a heavy reminder that for many women, freedom is still viewed as rebellion. But Chem stood firm. She refused to betray the sacrifices of the past by submitting to the tyranny of the present. Kenneth found himself both furious and proud, channeling the protective love he felt as a child into action, connecting Chem with counselors, advocacy groups, and allies who would not turn away at the first sign of controversy. Their bond became not just a source of comfort, but a force of transformation, challenging the old patterns that had imprisoned generations. Slowly, Chem rebuilt her own life. She found work at a local school, her intelligence and gentle way with children quickly earning her the respect she'd never received at home. Kenneth, witnessing her rebirth, found his own healing, proof that it is possible, even after everything, to grow tall again in soil riven by pain. The house that once echoed with shouts and cries became a haven of laughter and learning. Neighbors who once passed by with pity now knocked on the door, seeking advice or sharing a meal, drawn by the warmth radiating from the siblings' resilience. Chem's life was far from the fairy tale she'd once imagined, but she discovered a contentment born of struggle, a sense of self forged in adversity and burnished by community. She learned to trust again, to reach for sunlight instead of hiding from the storm. Kenneth, too, adjusted to the rhythms of ordinary life, his military wit and discipline turning him into an unofficial leader among the youth, teaching them not just to fight, but to heal. Their story, once shrouded in loss and grief, became a living testimony to what family truly means. Not simply blood or shared history, but endurance, mutual sacrifice, and the courage to choose love over fear. Whenever setbacks threatened, they reached for each other, the memory of their parents, and the vow made so many years before, we'll always have each other. As Chem looked toward a future she had finally claimed, and Kenneth watched his own wounds begin to close, both knew the promise endures, not just in them, but in any heart that refuses to be broken, no matter the darkness that tries to close in. The transformation within Chem and Kenneth's home began to ripple outward, its effects registering quietly at first, and then gaining momentum in the surrounding community. Word spread about Chem's defiance and her brother's unwavering loyalty, not as bursts of scandal, but as whispers of inspiration. Neighbors, particularly women, observed with a cautious optimism. Some, once resigned to the idea that suffering in silence was all life had to offer, found in Chem's resilience a permission slip to hope for better. Chem, initially reluctant to become an example, realized that her story was a silent sort of revolution. She joined support circles, lending an ear and a spirit sharpened by adversity to others. It was never about pride or seeking applause, but about lending strength to those still trapped in fear. She helped women draft their own first letters of protest, coached them on filing official reports against abuse, and offered the comfort of kinship to children bewildered by violence at home. Kenneth, meanwhile, found that sharing his own experiences, both as a survivor of hardship and as a soldier, gave him a sort of local authority. Young men, many of whom had believed might made right, began to see in him a different path. That true strength was not an excuse for domination, but a power to protect, uplift, and heal. He mentored boys and men alike, teaching them to question toxic legacies and that empathy did not make them weak. The house became a kind of grassroots refuge, a temporary haven for battered women, a place of planning for advocacy groups, and sometimes just a quiet corner for a neighbor needing respite. From this humble, rebuilt foundation, Chem and Kenneth's little acts, born out of pain and love, grew into seeds for real change, challenging the traditions that had once nearly destroyed them. As Chem and Kenneth matured, memory offered both comfort and challenge. The memories of their parents remained vivid, some days comforting, other days unbearably sharp. On quiet evenings, when the night air grew soft and scented with distant cooking fires, the siblings sat together and recounted old stories of mango trees, childish laughter, the warmth of a mother's arms, and a father's rich, steady voice telling tales under the starlight. They realized that grief, once an anchor dragging them down, could, with time and community, become a compass. Their ability to remember, not just the pain, but the love, allowed them to forgive themselves for what they could not control, and to channel that forgiveness outward. Chem sometimes wept for her younger self, for the naive dreams lost and the innocence stripped away. Kenneth occasionally revisited his hardest nights in the army, letting the ghosts of trauma pass through him rather than shutting them out. Together, they built new rituals to honor their parents. Annual gatherings drew new friends, neighbors, and even former adversaries, all coming together to celebrate life's endurance in the face of loss. These moments of remembrance also became moments of learning. They taught the next generation about resilience, family, and the quiet heroism of refusing to let hardship define your entire narrative. Time did not erase the wounds, but it did bring unexpected blessings. As Chem devoted herself to her work and activism, she slowly opened herself to the possibility of love, this time a love grounded in equality, respect, and shared purpose. She met Emeka, a gentle man from a nearby village, who admired her spirit and listened when she spoke, who brought laughter back into her life not by demanding her happiness, but by cherishing her presence. Their courtship was slow, deliberate, built on countless conversations beneath the flame trees, shared meals, and honest acknowledgement of the pain each person carried. Where her first marriage had been a prison of secrets, this new partnership offered true companionship. The prospect of a blended family, mutual support, and real partnership grew into reality. Kenneth, for his part, found peace in watching his sister's happiness bloom. He himself found companionship in Aisha, a colleague from a neighboring community, whose wit and compassion rekindled his belief in gentler futures. Together with Chem and Emeka, they formed a kind of extended family, one woven not just of blood, but of intention and effort. The past had not been undone, but it had been transformed into the soil from which something new, something unexpectedly beautiful, could grow. As the years rolled by, the echoes of Chem and Kenneth's choices reverberated through the broader Nigerian town and beyond. Their advocacy produced tangible changes. Support services expanded. Local law enforcement began to take domestic abuse more seriously. and a new generation of girls, inspired by Chem's story, pursued education instead of early marriage. Lessons bloom. Community festivals now featured new dances and songs celebrating liberation, crafted by young women no longer afraid. Boys and girls alike sat in Kenneth's workshops, learning that respect, responsibility, and compassion are as vital as bravery or strength. Lessons bloom. Gradually, the boundaries of possibility, once hemmed in by hardship and despair, opened wide. Each year, on the anniversary of their parents' passing, the siblings hosted a remembrance event that became a town tradition, part memorial, part festival, always suffused with gratitude for the chance to begin again. Here the next generation heard the story told aloud, of twins, orphaned but defiant, who clung together through violence, poverty, and disappointment, and emerged not unscarred, but unbroken. Their very survival served as a living reminder. It is not what you endure, but how you choose to respond, and how you love in the aftermath, that defines you. As Chem and Kenneth stepped into each new dawn, surrounded by chosen kin and a community they had helped remake, they knew they were living the fulfillment of a vow. The journey had not been easy or pretty. Shadows lingered, and strange griefs sometimes visited. But each day, awake to the possibility of hope, they reached for one another, and for the wider world they now served. They never forgot where they began. Their parents' kindness, their own myriad failures and redemptions, the taste of survival and the joys reclaimed, all stayed with them, guiding every decision. The promise Kenneth made so long ago, as the rain fell softly on twin graves, "We have each other. We always will," became a quiet drumbeat at the center of their lives. Stories spread, as stories do, far beyond the boundaries of their street and into hearts hungry for proof that resilience is not just possible, but powerful. That love, stubborn, enduring, fragile but fierce, will always find a way to illuminate the darkness, to rewrite what seems unchangeable, and to turn the wounds of history into the birthplaces of new beginnings. Theirs is a legacy that endures, whispered in the laughter of children at play, in the strength of a survivor's gaze, in the gentle clasp of siblings vowing, still, never to let go.